You invent something. You do it the legal way. You file a patent with the United States Patent and Trademark Office. You wait. And instead of approval, a letter arrives. Not a rejection. Something worse. A secrecy order. From this moment forward, you cannot sell your invention. You cannot publish it. You cannot discuss it with investors, journalists, or even your own attorney, because explaining the case would violate the order. If you break it, 2 years in a federal cell. This is not a Cold War relic. This is active American law. Title 35, United States Code, Section 181, the Invention Secrecy Act of 1951. And as of the most recent count by the Federation of American Scientists, nearly 6,000 patents sit under active secrecy orders right now. Not during wartime, not under martial law, right now in peacetime. Nearly 6,000 ideas are locked behind a classification wall, and the people who created them have no right to appeal, no right to compensation, and in many cases, no right to even acknowledge their own work exists. What follows are 10 of those cases, not theories, court records, patent filings, congressional testimony. 10 inventors who built something real and watched the system bury it. In 1941, an Austrian physicist sat alone in an American laboratory, hands stained with ferrite dust, calibrating a material that would reshape modern warfare. He had fled Vienna 3 years earlier, one step ahead of the annexation. His name was Otto Halpern, and the dark, layered substance drying under his equipment would make radar, the most decisive technology of the Second World War, partially blind. Halpern's approach was elegant. He engineered coatings with gradient impedance, layered materials that matched the wave resistance of air so precisely that incoming radar pulses passed into the surface and never bounced back. In principle, any object covered in Halpern's material became difficult to detect. In practice, it worked well enough that the United States Navy began applying it to vessels and equipment during the war. Then the secrecy order landed. Halpern's patent application was frozen. He could not publish the theoretical foundations of his work. He could not present at conferences. He could not license the technology to private industry. The Navy, meanwhile, continued using what he had built. In 1958, Halpern sued. The case reached the United States Court of Appeals for the Second Circuit, and here is where the system revealed its architecture. The court ruled that it could not hear the case while the secrecy order remained active, but the secrecy order would not be lifted while the technology had military value, and the technology would have military value for as long as radar existed. A perfect loop. The inventor locked outside, the government inside, using his work without paying for it. The Associated Press reported on the proceedings, one of the earliest instances of press coverage penetrating the secrecy apparatus, and called it a secret court. Halpern received nothing, not a dollar, not an acknowledgement. 3 decades later, Lockheed Skunk Works unveiled the F-117 Nighthawk, the first operational stealth aircraft. The press called it revolutionary. The physics it relied on, absorbing radar energy through impedance-matched coatings, was the same physics Otto Halpern had described in 1941. His name appeared in none of the coverage. The technology did not fail. It succeeded so completely that it had to be taken, and the man who built it was erased from the story of the thing he made possible. Now hold that thought. Stealth technology, the crown jewel of American air superiority, because the next case does not involve making something invisible. It involves making the invisible visible again. And the government buried that too. In 2000, an engineer named James Greer filed a patent for a passive radar detection system. The concept was deceptively simple, and if you understand it, you will understand exactly why it terrified the Pentagon. Traditional radar works by broadcasting a signal and reading the echo. Stealth aircraft are designed to scatter that echo, to send it everywhere except back to the receiver. Greer's approach flipped the equation entirely. Instead of broadcasting its own signal, his device analyzed disturbances in background electromagnetic noise that already saturates the atmosphere. Television broadcasts, cell tower signals, commercial radio waves, FM stations playing pop music. Every stealth jet, no matter how carefully shaped, displaces those ambient signals as it moves through them. Greer's system listened for that displacement, the electromagnetic shadow of an aircraft that was supposed to cast none. If it worked at scale, every F-22 Raptor, every B-2 Spirit, every stealth drone in the American arsenal became detectable using equipment that cost a fraction of a conventional radar array. The secrecy order arrived the same year. For 8 years, Greer could not develop the technology, could not seek funding, could not partner with universities or defense contractors. His patent sat in a locked drawer at the United States Patent and Trademark Office while he watched the calendar turn. In 2008, the order was lifted, not because anyone in Washington decided Greer deserved his rights back. The order was lifted because China and the Czech Republic had independently announced passive radar systems based on identical principles. The secret was no longer a secret. It just was not American anymore. Greer publicly stated that his patent had been frozen specifically to buy the Pentagon time to develop countermeasures against the very vulnerability his device exposed. The government wanted to keep stealth viable, and the fastest way to do that was not to improve stealth, but to ensure nobody in the civilian world could build a detector. 8 years. That is not a bureaucratic delay. That is a strategic window. Long enough for Lockheed Martin and Raytheon to study the problem under classified contracts. Long enough for the Air Force to redesign radar-absorbent profiles on the next generation of stealth platforms. And long enough for Greer's commercial window to close permanently. Consider the sequence. The United States developed stealth technology, partly using physics pioneered by Halpern, who was never compensated. Then an American inventor finds a way to defeat stealth, and the government freezes his work until foreign rivals independently close the gap. One inventor suppressed to build the sword, another suppressed to keep the sword sharp. Same law, same clause, same silence. 64 years. That is how long the United States government kept a patent under seal. Not for a nuclear trigger, not for a bioweapon, for a mechanical cipher, a portable field encryption device designed in 1936. The inventor filed his application before the Second World War began. The secrecy order was imposed shortly after. And every year, without review, without audit, without anyone apparently asking whether a hand-cranked cipher machine from the Roosevelt administration still posed a threat to national security, the order was renewed. By the time the patent was finally published in the year 2000, the Internet existed. Satellites handled military encryption. Quantum computing was being discussed in academic journals. Cell phones had replaced field radios. The Berlin Wall had fallen, been sold in chunks as souvenirs, and the chunks had ended up on eBay. And somewhere in the archives of the Patent Office, a clerk stamped a release date on blueprints drawn with a fountain pen on Depression-era paper. The filing, when it appeared, must have confused anyone who noticed. Technical drawings in the visual language of the 1930s, cross-hatching, hand-lettered labels, imperial measurements, printed alongside a publication date from the 21st century. A museum piece wearing a fresh timestamp. I have spent more hours than I should admit reading declassified patent logs. Page after page of inventions emerging, blinking into daylight decades after they mattered. And what unsettles me is not the dramatic cases, the stealth coatings and anti-radar systems. It is the quiet ones. The devices nobody fought for because the inventor was already in the ground and nobody remembered what the device was supposed to do. The secrecy machine does not need malice to function. It runs on inertia, and inertia does not carry an expiration date. The inventor almost certainly never saw his work published. The government never adopted the device, which means no compensation was owed. But the secrecy order prevented any private sale. A man designed something in 1936. It was classified. He could not profit from it. He could not talk about it. And when the world finally saw it, it belonged to a century that no longer needed it. The patent did not expire. It was outlived. Not every suppressed technology involves weapons or stealth. Some threaten something the government considers even more sensitive. its ability to listen. In 1978, a small team of engineers built a device they called the phaser phone. It was designed for a simple consumer market, office workers and business executives who wanted private telephone conversations. The device clipped onto a standard handset and scrambled the speaker's voice in real time using spectral deformation algorithms. Anyone intercepting the call heard noise. The intended recipient, using a matching unit, heard the original voice clearly. The National Security Agency, the branch of the American intelligence community responsible for signals interception, placed a secrecy order on the patent application within months. The agency's stated justification was that widespread availability of consumer voice encryption would damage national security. Foreign agents could use it. Criminals could use it. The ability of the state to conduct lawful surveillance would be compromised. The language in the order was clinical. The implication was not. If this device reached the open market, every wiretap in America would go dark. What the agency did not say, and what the inventors understood immediately, was that the phaser phone's underlying architecture bore uncomfortable similarities to encryption methods the government itself was using on classified lines. Releasing the patent would have revealed, by implication, something about how Washington protected its own communications. The device was not just a threat to surveillance. It was a mirror held up to the government's own methods. The inventors made a decision that most patent holders in their position never attempt. They went to the press. They contacted journalists covering intelligence and technology. They framed the case not as a business dispute, but as a constitutional one, the right of American citizens to protect their own conversations. The strategy worked. Within months, the public pressure forced the National Security Agency to withdraw the order. The phaser phone became one of the only cases where media exposure reversed a secrecy classification. But the victory was fragile. The underlying conflict, should citizens be allowed to build encryption tools that the government cannot break, did not end with the phaser phone. It resurfaced in the 1990s as the crypto wars. It resurfaced again in 2016, when the Federal Bureau of Investigation demanded that Apple build a back door into the iPhone. The same question, decade after decade, wearing different faces. And the phaser phone was the first time someone forced the government to blink. Imagine a world where that team had stayed quiet, where consumer encryption had been delayed not by months, but by decades, where the legal precedent was set that any privacy tool could be seized the moment it inconvenienced an intelligence agency. The phaser phone did not just protect phone calls. It protected the idea that citizens have the right to build tools the government cannot hear through. And that idea, the right to modify, improve, and control the devices in your own hands, has a longer and stranger history than most people realize. Forget stealth aircraft and cryptographic warfare for a moment. The strangest battle in the history of American telecommunications was fought over a piece of plastic that weighed less than a cup of coffee, and it began half a century before the phaser phone existed. In 1921, an acoustics engineer named Leo Beranek designed a small, cup-shaped device that snapped over the mouthpiece of a telephone handset. It did one thing. It blocked ambient noise so that people in open-plan offices could have private conversations without shouting. No electronics, no wires, no connection to the telephone network whatsoever. A hollow shell. That was it. He called it the Hushaphone. The American Telephone and Telegraph Company, AT&T, declared war on it. AT&T at the time controlled every telephone in America, every handset, every cable, every switchboard. Customers did not own their phones. They rented them. And AT&T's legal team invoked Tariff Provision 132, which prohibited any foreign attachment to Bell system equipment. Their argument, presented with absolute seriousness to the Federal Communications Commission, was that a plastic cup placed over a phone mouthpiece could degrade the performance of the entire national telephone network. Engineers at Bell Labs, the most prestigious research laboratory in the world, the birthplace of the transistor, were reportedly asked to produce test results showing audio distortion caused by the device. A hollow plastic shell versus the largest corporation on the planet. The case dragged on for 35 years, 3.5 decades of legal motions, regulatory hearings, and corporate lobbying over an object a child could have designed. In 1956, the District of Columbia Circuit Court ruled in favor of hush-a-phone. The decision established a principle that sounds obvious today, but was radical at the time. A customer has the right to use any device with a telephone, as long as it does not physically harm the network. That ruling cracked the monopoly. Without it, no one could legally attach a modem to a phone line, no fax machines, no answering machines, no dial-up internet. The entire architecture of modern connectivity traces back to a court deciding that AT&T could not ban a plastic cup. AT&T's lawyers did not stop at the courtroom. They pursued individual customers, including, by some accounts, housewives, who had purchased the device, threatening service disconnection. A trillion-dollar monopoly, marshalling its full legal apparatus against a hollow piece of molded plastic. Not because the device was dangerous, because it proved that the network could be touched by someone other than AT&T. The telephone monopoly learned nothing from that defeat. 14 years after losing the hush-a-phone case, AT&T deployed a subtler weapon against its next competitor, one that left no courtroom fingerprints. In 1970, a company called PhoneTel introduced a device that allowed businesses to monitor and control their long-distance calling costs. It connected to the telephone line through a simple interface. It tracked call duration, flagged unauthorized use, and saved corporate clients real money every billing cycle. Customers wanted it. Sales were growing. AT&T could not ban it outright. The hush-a-phone precedent had seen to that. The courts had already ruled that customers could attach devices to the network. So instead of fighting in the courtroom, AT&T fought in the tariff ledger. The company introduced a new provision. Any customer using a third-party device was now required to rent a protective coupling arrangement, a small piece of AT&T hardware installed between the phone line and the foreign device. The stated purpose was to protect network integrity. The actual purpose was arithmetic. The math was surgical. Buy the PhoneTel unit, save $40 a month on calling costs. Rent AT&T's mandatory protection, pay $45 a month. Net result, the customer now lost $5 for the privilege of using a money-saving device. The innovation became more expensive than doing nothing. And the protective hardware AT&T required? Engineers who examined it described its technical contribution as negligible. It was not a safety device. It was a toll booth. In 1974, PhoneTel filed a $30 million antitrust suit, accusing AT&T of conspiring to eliminate competition through regulatory manipulation. The company argued that AT&T had written the rules specifically to strangle any device that threatened its revenue, not by making them illegal, but by making them economically pointless. The case wound through courts for years. By the time it reached resolution, PhoneTel was financially exhausted. The product was dead. AT&T had not banned it. AT&T had not broken it. AT&T had simply made it cost more than it was worth. When you cannot outlaw an invention, you can always outprice it. What strikes me about the hush-a-phone and PhoneTel cases together is the evolution. In 1921, AT&T used a hammer, raw legal prohibition, outright bans, threats of disconnection. It lost. So by 1970, the monopoly had learned. The weapon became invisible. A tariff line on page 37 of a regulatory filing. No headlines, no public outrage. Just a number, carefully calibrated to make progress unprofitable. The most dangerous monopolies are the ones that learn from their defeats. Most of these stories end the same way. The inventor loses, the technology vanishes, the file closes. But in 2009, a married couple from the Midwest decided to push back against the machine. And what happened next exposed something about the secrecy system that decades of legal scholarship had failed to reveal. Budimir and Desanka Damjanovic, a Serbian-American engineering couple, developed a defense system for commercial aircraft. The concept was brutally practical. A nozzle mounted on the tail of a passenger jet would spray an aerosolized liquid that confused the infrared seekers on shoulder-fired missiles. Man-portable air defense systems, the kind of cheap, portable weapons that had already brought down civilian aircraft in Iraq, Afghanistan, and East Africa. The Damjanovich system was designed to save lives at 30,000 feet. It was not theoretical. It was engineered, tested, and ready for patent review. They filed. The secrecy order came in 2009, and within months, their company, years of savings, engineering work, and prototyping, was bankrupt. They could not pitch the technology to airlines. They could not seek venture capital. They could not even apply for government defense grants because doing so would require describing a project they were legally prohibited from discussing. Budimir and Desanka did something almost no one in their position had attempted. They sued the federal government. They argued that the secrecy order violated the Fifth Amendment, the constitutional guarantee that private property cannot be taken for public use without just compensation. The government, they claimed, had effectively seized their intellectual property, used the classification system as a tool of confiscation, and offered nothing in return. In 2014, the case was settled. The government acknowledged that the technology was not, in fact, critically classified. The secrecy order was lifted. And the Damjanovic family received $63,000. $63,000 for 5 years of enforced silence. A destroyed business, a retirement fund drained by legal fees, a technology designed to protect civilian passengers from missile attacks, delayed by half a decade while real missiles continued to threaten real aircraft. The settlement was less than what many Americans pay for a mid-size sedan. And perhaps the most revealing detail, the government did not fight the case on its merits. It settled quietly, without admitting fault, because a full trial would have required explaining in open court exactly how secrecy orders are evaluated, or more precisely, how rarely they are evaluated at all. The system would rather pay $63,000 than answer that question under oath. In 1969, an engineer named James Constant filed a patent for a precision radar system designed to track shipping containers and freight across ports and logistics networks. It was a commercial technology. No warheads, no targeting systems. A tool for making global trade faster and more reliable. The kind of mundane, lucrative innovation that builds empires of commerce. The secrecy order was imposed that same year. And here is where the story turns into something a legal theorist might design as a thought experiment. Except it was real, and it destroyed a man's career. Constant spent 2 years unable to seek investors, unable to demonstrate his system to shipping companies, unable to do anything except watch the logistics industry evolve in real time while his solution gathered dust under seal. The container shipping revolution was accelerating. New ports were opening. Automation was the future, and Constant held the key to a door he was forbidden to open. In 1971, the order was lifted. By then, major defense contractors with government clearances, companies like Raytheon and Hughes Aircraft, had begun developing nearly identical tracking systems. Systems they could build and sell freely because their classified relationships with the Pentagon gave them access to the very research ecosystem Constant was excluded from. Constant sued in 1982. He wanted compensation for lost commercial opportunity, and the court's response was the most elegant act of legal cruelty in this entire investigation. The judge ruled against him. The reasoning? Constant could not prove lost profits because during the period of secrecy, he had been legally prohibited from seeking buyers. He could not demonstrate market demand because the law forbade him from creating market demand. He could not show what contracts he might have won because approaching potential clients would have been a federal crime. The silence that was imposed on him became the evidence that he had suffered no harm. A trap so perfectly constructed that the act of being caught in it erases the proof that it exists. Constant lost a 2-year window in the shipping industry and never recovered. The next inventor lost his window during the single most explosive period of wireless growth in human history. In 2002, an engineer named Robert Gold filed a patent for a method of increasing the throughput of wireless data transmission. The timing could not have been worse, or better, depending on your perspective. The commercial Wi-Fi standard had just been ratified. Mobile broadband was emerging. The world was about to enter a decade-long race for faster wireless connectivity, and Gold held a patent that addressed one of its fundamental bottlenecks. The secrecy order arrived the same year. Gold's technology concerned modulation techniques, methods for packing more data into the same slice of radio spectrum. The military applications were obvious, but so were the civilian ones. Faster wireless for hospitals, airports, schools, emergency services. While Gold sat under his order, unable to license or develop his work, the largest telecommunications contractors in the country, companies with existing Pentagon relationships and security clearances, continued their own research into identical problems. They had access to classified technical literature. Gold did not. They could publish findings, present at conferences, attract investment. Gold could not even explain what he had built to his own family in technical terms. Something about this particular case set off every alarm I have. Not because the suppression was violent, it was not, but because the timing was so clean. Gold files a patent in the exact year that wireless demand explodes. The order arrives before anyone outside a classified review board sees his work. And the companies best positioned to benefit from the delay are the ones already inside the classification fence. Coincidence is a word that becomes less convincing the more often you have to use it. I do not know whether Gold's specific patent would have changed the trajectory of wireless technology. Nobody does. And that is precisely the point. The secrecy system does not just suppress inventions, it suppresses the counterfactual, the alternate version of the world where the idea was allowed to compete. You cannot measure what you were never permitted to build. You cannot mourn a future you were not allowed to see. The government did not claim Gold's technology was dangerous. It claimed the technology was sensitive. And in the vocabulary of the Invention Secrecy Act, sensitive means whatever the reviewing agency decides it means, with no obligation to explain the reasoning, no independent oversight, and no sunset clause unless someone remembers to write one. Everything so far has followed a familiar mechanism: a law, a secrecy order, a frozen patent, a ruined career. But the oldest and perhaps most devastating case on this list requires no law at all, no stamp of classification, no federal court, just an industry that preferred profit over progress, and a filing cabinet that nobody bothered to open for 70 years. In the 1920s, a mechanical engineer named George Arlington Moore held a record that may never be broken. Over the course of his career, he was granted approximately 17,000 patents. 17,000 separate inventions filed and approved, covering everything from pneumatic systems to fuel delivery mechanisms. His braking designs became the standard in American railroads, the systems that stopped freight trains weighing thousands of tons from coast to coast. His fuel injection improvements extended engine life by 10 to 15%. The automotive and rail industries adopted his work eagerly, specifically the parts that saved them money. But Moore also designed something else, something the industries did not want: exhaust purification systems for internal combustion engines. In 1925, the same year that Calvin Coolidge was president and commercial radio was still a novelty, Moore filed patents describing methods that could eliminate carbon monoxide from automotive tailpipe emissions. Not reduce by a percentage, eliminate. The chemical process was documented, the engineering was specified, the prototype existed. The railroads took his brakes, the automakers took his injectors, the exhaust systems gathered dust. No secrecy order was filed, no court intervened, no agency reviewed the technology and stamped it classified. The suppression was simpler than that, and in some ways more complete. The industry looked at the portfolio, selected the innovations that improved profit margins, and declined the rest. Clean air had no quarterly earnings attached to it. There was no customer demand for breathable cities. Not in 1925, not when smog was just weather and lung disease was just life. Modern engineers who have studied Moore's original blueprints, and there are researchers who have done exactly this, cross-referencing his filing numbers with the Patent Office archives, report finding emission solutions that the automotive industry did not commercially implement until the catalytic converter era of the 1970s and beyond. Some of his approaches were not rediscovered until the 90s. 70 years of accumulated smog, decades of acid rain dissolving stonework across eastern cities, millions of cases of childhood asthma, emphysema, and respiratory failure, accumulating in the atmosphere while the blueprints sat in a filing cabinet that anyone could have opened. Moore's name survives in railroad engineering manuals. His braking systems are still studied in mechanical engineering courses. His exhaust purification work is a footnote, if it appears at all. The industry did not suppress George Arlington Moore. It simply took what it wanted and left the rest to decay. And the part it left behind happened to be the part that mattered most for every human being who breathes. Personally, I think this case is the most unsettling of the 10, not because it involves the most dramatic act of suppression, but because it involves the least. No secret courts, no intelligence agencies, no constitutional arguments, no anguished lawsuits. Just a market that optimized for next quarter's balance sheet and let a century of breathable air pass by. The others required a government apparatus. This one only required indifference. 10 cases, 10 technologies that functioned. A stealth coating seized and used without payment. An anti-stealth radar frozen until foreign rivals caught up. A cipher locked away for 6 decades past its relevance. A voice encryption device nearly strangled at birth. A plastic cup that cracked a monopoly. A fee schedule that killed an innovation. A couple bankrupted and compensated with pocket change. A legal trap that erased its own evidence. A wireless breakthrough buried during the broadband revolution. And an exhaust system that could have cleaned the air a lifetime ago. The pattern is not complicated. When an invention threatens a budget, a monopoly, or a surveillance capability, the system has tools to delay it, sometimes by years, sometimes by generations. The mechanism changes. The outcome does not. Most people hear about suppressed technology and think it sounds like conspiracy, fringe talk, tinfoil territory. But these are not rumors. These are federal court rulings. These are entries in the Patent Office Gazette. These are numbers published annually by the Federation of American Scientists, and the number keeps climbing. You stayed through all 10. You read the court docket numbers. You traced the pattern that 5,900 sealed patents imply. So pick the case that disturbed you most. The one where the math does not add up. The one where the official justification sounds a little too convenient. Drop it in the comments and make your argument. The sharpest breakdown gets pinned. Subscribe if this is the kind of investigation that keeps you thinking past the algorithm. Because there are more drawers, and most of them have not been opened yet.